They are your future. Our fathers and mothers have failed to release us. Into the welcoming arms of the amethyst deceivers.
You're listening to Will Stone Show on Resonance FM. And this is Peter Christopherson from Threshold Houseboys Choir. So keep listening. I first came to be involved with experimental music in school. I was at a co-educational boarding school in Yorkshire called Ackworth. And there was one wing which just had a lot of little pianos, a lot of little rooms with pianos where people were supposed to go and practice their scales or whatever. And I actually went and just started to make music with the piano that expressed what I was feeling. I had some piano lessons, but in fact I was more interested in forgetting what I'd learnt already as a 8-year-old, and rather just making the sounds that spoke to me and to my emotional state at that time. And I think it's a great luxury, in a sense, not to have a musical education, because it allows you to make a direct connection between your kind of heart and your soul and the sounds that you make. Whereas the more discipline you've had to employ or had employed on you to learn the craft of musical technique, the more that actually delimits the sort of freedom of expression between your hand and your soul, if you know what I mean. In school we had a couple of concerts, and our band was called Pulsing Vein, which some people would relate in some way to Throbbing Gristle, but it was kind of one of those coincidences. I'm sure that all of the staff were bemused by our concerts, because that involved kind of tape recorders going backwards and cut-ups and things, probably before we'd heard of William Burroughs or read about his experiments along those lines. Throbbing Gristle was my first band, and TG came about because I was part of a performance art collective called Coombe with Genesis and Cozy, and we decided that the art world was too kind of up its own arse really and refined, and we wanted to bring our message to young people who would be more willing to go to a concert than they would be to go to an art show. And so that's why we started Throbbing Gristle. And we kind of finished Throbbing Gristle because we felt that it had become a pastiche of itself, and we'd taken it as far as we wanted to take it without it becoming some kind of demon or beast that was not totally within our control. So we finished that, and various sort of different personal clashes and so on were going on within the band, which caused Chris and Cozy to set up their own thing. And Genesis and I wanted to work more in the world of television and kind of pirate TV, but we didn't really have the technology at that time, certainly not to broadcast. We started to do some pirate videos of underground kind of videos, and almost by accident we ended up doing music under the name of Psychic TV, as well as doing TV under the name of Psychic TV, which was the original intention. John Balance, who I know as Jeff, and I were part of Psychic TV, the music cooperative, as was David Tibet and various other people who became subsequently famous. And it became clear to us that although we were kind of espousing a kind of free-thinking type of philosophy, that Genesis at the time wanted to go further into the role of being a cult leader with the Temple of Psychic Youth, which was another of our mutual creations. And so Jeff and I left Psychic TV because we weren't comfortable with that, and we started Coil in 1983. I was initially reluctant to start a third band because I wasn't sure how we could do something that was new, but gradually, and with the technology arriving of Fairlight and so on, it became clear that we could do something that was new in that direction, and Jeff was very keen, not having done all that much, to pursue a musical career. I suppose it is true that Throbbing Gristle and Coil were, or continue to be, influential in certain circles. What I hope the main influence of those bands is to show people that you don't necessarily need 3 chords to start a band, as they always used to say in the punk days, and that it didn't matter really what training you've had, as long as you have inspiration and as long as you have willingness to work and a willingness to make editorial judgments about what you do, because the main difficulty with people who want to make music that sounds like Throbbing Gristle or like Coil is that they don't make enough editorial judgments about what's good and on whether it could be better and how to make it better. So there are quite a lot of so-called industrial groups that I can't listen to because it seems like they haven't tried hard enough somehow, which is not to say they're not good, but they're just not for me. Am I surprised about the legacy? Well, I don't know, really. Yeah, I suppose I am. It always seemed to me that one should, think of something that one wants to do and pursue it as far as one possibly can to, make it as good as one possibly can. And that just seemed like obvious to me, but I don't know. The nicest thing about the legacy is all the mail actually that we get, and even with Coil, for example, we used to get loads and loads and loads and loads of emails and letters from people saying, I'm HIV positive, I think I'm going to die soon, your music's made my life a bit more bearable. And when you get those letters, it's hard not to feel sort of humble and grateful that we were able to bring that feeling of relief or belonging or being a part of something greater than the individual. That's the best part of it, really. Coil went through many, many changes over 20 years. The changes came about partly as a result of being very easily bored by what we were doing and wanting to move on. We never really wanted to repeat, any of our records and make another one that sounded similar to the last one. Maybe that's another way to make sure that your records stay fresh. It's never to do the same thing twice. And also the changes came about because of changes in our personality, in our interests and our needs and what have you. During the late 80s, it's true to say that we went out clubbing a lot and certainly took a lot of ecstasy. And the main reason for that was I think we were struggling to find a kind of intimacy that didn't involve sexual contact as a consequence of the AIDS. From 84 through to 2000 odd, intimacy was regarded as with fear, really. Whether there was a relationship between the idea of being truly intimate with someone and the idea that could kill you. And so the Summer of Love and the whole ecstasy explosion in the late 80s was a way of trying to find that contact without sexual contact, if you know what I mean. A consequence of our ecstasy use was that Jeff started to use alcohol to recover. Well, ecstasy is a drug that can be fabulous at the time that you're on it, but actually has increasingly long time to recover from, and Jeff started to drink to excess when coming down, basically the day after and the day after the day after. And unfortunately his use of alcohol continued to increase, and he found that he couldn't live without it, or didn't want to live without it. And even when we weren't taking any drugs, which we didn't take very many drugs after the early 90s, I don't think. So he became alcoholic, and although he wasn't terribly pleased with the idea of being alcoholic or the actual practicality of it, the need to buy several bottles of wine to start with and then subsequently several bottles of vodka a day as things went on, nevertheless he still preferred the comfort that it gave him to the discomfort of not having it. He went into rehab a few times. The first time that was relatively successful. He stayed off for about 6 months. He had also implants and stuff to discourage him from drinking, but without success. And so from the beginning of the 21st century onwards, when we started to tour, it was kind of a constant struggle between the dominance of the booze or the dominance of his willpower to perform relatively straight and to perform well. I became kind of not only the sort of leader of the band, but also the nanny, who had to look after him when he was drunk and stuff, which was quite boring. This came to a sort of a head, really, in around 82, 83, I think. We went to have sushi, and he announced that we were split up. We were no longer a couple, which was in some way a relief for me, but in other ways, at the same time, nothing changed. He continued to live in the house we shared, and to need to be babysat, and when he was drunk, and to be drunk when he wanted to be drunk, which was most of the time. So, did his death come as a shock? Well, yes, it came as a shock, but it didn't come as a surprise. obviously, we've been together for a long time, and so it was a big jump to find that, I was alone again, or as it were. But it certainly didn't come as a surprise, because we've been telling him that if he didn't stop drinking, it was going to happen for a long time. He leant out too far in his desire to look into the abyss. And if you do genuinely desire to look into the abyss, then it's more or less inevitable that, if you don't take the proper precautions of hanging on, that you're going to fall.
vitality, with filaments as fine as a spider's web, pour through your mouth. They pour through your mouth. A river of silver, a river of flowers. I lie down and shiver in your silver river. Out drips the last drop of this vital fluid. Our life has grown weary. The stars have grown old. Are you still shivering? Are you still cold? Are you loathsome tonight? Does your madness shine bright? Are you loathsome tonight? In the oceans of the moon, swimming squid-like and squalid, this bright moon is a liquid. The dark earth is a solid. This is moon music in the light of the moon.
This is about Coil's dark ambient style. Well, I don't know. I just have a very low threshold of boredom. You know, sometimes you can put a record on and it's a drone or a rumble that goes on for a long time, and it's fine and it serves its purpose. And the music that I play now is relatively, more or less conventional. Either it's like Boards of Canada, or it's like local kind of weird folk music or whatever. I don't know. It depends what you want your music for. If you want your music to just fill in the sort of gaps, then it's okay if it's a rumble for half an hour. But I personally find that boring. I like music to do a bit more, and so I tend to try and make it more interesting, or to do more unexpected things or whatever. I think it's just about one's threshold of boredom, really. My current project, as you probably know, is the Threshold Houseboys Choir, which I had discussed with Jeff, even before his accident, and he thought it was a good idea. And that, as some of people may know, it doesn't really necessarily involve a conventional choir as such, and I've decided to do most of my vocals within the computer. If my vocalist crashes again, I'll have a backup. So that's what I'm working on, using all different kinds of voices. Some voices are sampled, some are totally, electronically generated. Some are me, but manipulated, so as to sound a bit more interesting than I do. So that's what I'm working on. I have a project with Ivan Pavlov of COH. He makes more kind of brutalist electronic kind of music, and we plan to work together next year, hopefully. But I'm not saying any more about that right now. The reason that I released the combined DVD and CD of the Threshold Houseboys Choir was because bits and pieces of the video had started to appear on YouTube and in various other places that were just sort of shot on people's phones at the two or three shows that I'd done where the video was played, including one in the Brainwashed Festival in whenever it was, last year sometime. And I didn't want the first time that people saw the video to be in not very good quality and crappy handheld off the screen reshot stuff. So I decided to release it as a proper thing. All the reviews that I've seen and all of the comments that I've seen about this work have been overwhelmingly positive and appreciative. I don't know whether to say that it's a soundtrack to a film, or whether the film is an accompaniment as a video that goes with the music. Neither of them came first, really. They were both simultaneous, and so it's hard to describe what kind of a work it is. The footage is documentary, and it shows the Ginche festival in the south of Thailand, which is designed basically to scare away malign spirits and to bring merit to the community. But in doing, the way that they do that is in relatively gory sort of ways. A bunch of, in this case, sort of low-class, working-class type kids go into trance and do various gory things, putting metal through their cheeks and all that stuff, and cutting their tongues with straight razors and things like that. But what you will find is that although that sounds sort of horrifying and disgusting and heavy, you'll find that the film that I made of it is actually quite slow and beautiful and contemplative, if there is such a word. The music likewise takes you further towards the kind of spiritual state that I believe that these boys achieve for themselves as part of the ritual, which is a kind of elevated state of what's the word, spirituality or whatever. The reason that I put the CD in the package was because I wanted people to be able to listen to the music without having to watch the film if they didn't want to. Because it's not suitable for every occasion, and I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to show it to their kids and so on without due explanation and warning and so on. I think it's a work of beauty and calm and peace, but that's in great contrast to the actual appearance of the images, which is what's interesting about it for me, and hopefully for other people too.
children of the black sun. We are children. We are children. We are children of the black sun. We are children. We are children of the black sun. We are born. We are born. We are born under a black sun. We are children. We are children. I'm William Burroughs is hallucinating in space. I'm William Burroughs is Are we going in space? I'm William Burroughs is hallucinating in space. The animal saliva will survive. And the animal saliva will survive. And the animal saliva will survive. Animal saliva.
The Ape of Naples was a title that Jeff and Simon, also known as Ossian, came up with. Simon used to work in a porno store in Soho in London. There used to be an array of VHS tapes on the counter that hunters could select, and the titles, were handwritten on the spines of these tapes. And Jeff and Simon always used to make up imaginary titles for their own amusement of these gay hardcore porn films. And The Ape of Naples was one such title. I think actually Black Antlers was another. So both of those titles originally were intended to be porn films, but ended up as Coil albums instead. And after Jeff died, I decided that there was this material that was outstanding that had never been on the Coil album, that was developed mainly for live shows, but also, ultimately to be released as a record. And so I mixed that material in the months after his death, and I think that accounts possibly for the intensity and the fact that people find it kind of so moving. Some of the tracks were from the session that we recorded in New Orleans at Trent Reznor's studio. For a while I lived in Los Angeles, and at a party once, Trent and his manager said, we're building the studio in New Orleans, why don't you come down and use it? So I said that would be lovely. To the best of my knowledge, we were the only band that they didn't actually charge proper studio rates for. I'm pretty sure they charged Marilyn Manson, the going rate, but Coil got it for free, which I'm glad to say, because we could never have afforded it if we'd had to pay. The music that we made at the time in New Orleans was, we felt it was kind of infected slightly with New Orleans-y kind of rock distortion sound that we weren't subsequently very keen on, and there was just something about the songs that we recorded there directly that we felt we weren't happy with, or that we didn't know why we didn't want to release them, but we knew we didn't. When I came to remix or to produce The Ape of Naples, suddenly they seemed to be more pertinent or apt, and so that tended to make the album more intense also. I had lived in Thailand for several stretches of 3 or 4 or 5, even 6 months at a time in the preceding few years, even before Jeff died, and I knew ultimately that I wanted to live here because it's just a much more pleasant place to live than England. There are lots of things I like about Thailand, not least the fact that I feel that the skin that separates the real world from the world of the supernatural, of spirits, ghosts, all kinds of creatures or visions, from beyond this plane of existence. The skin is much thinner here in Thailand than it is in the UK. Generally speaking, in the UK, ghosts and visions of those kinds of, I don't know, they're kind of removed, they're lonely, they're separate, they're mostly invisible to most people. Whereas here, you can talk to any taxi driver and he will tell you about ghosts that he's had in his cab. After the tsunami, there was a big phenomena amongst the taxi drivers in Bangkok. Many taxi drivers reported picking up Westerners from the train station or from hotels, whatever, wanting to go to the airport, and driving them to the airport and finding on arrival at the terminal that their cabs were empty. And all the taxi drivers would swear blind and would tell you that it was because of the Westerners that had died in the tsunami who were trying to get home, or the ghosts or their spirits were trying to get home by going to the airport. So take that with a pinch of salt or at face value, as you like. I don't like to become inebriated just to see across the divide. I don't, in the way that Jeff used to. I don't need to, drink. I don't need to take drugs, particularly to see across. And that's the main thing that I like. Apart from that, the weather's gorgeous, the food's gorgeous, the people are gorgeous, and it's about a quarter the price of living in England. So I don't think I would say that Coral was a gay band as such, although obviously nearly all of the people that ever worked with us were gay or homosexual. But we didn't identify with, as Mark Allman said at his concert at the Wilton Music Hall, we might be friends of Dorothy, but we weren't friends of Elton. Which is kind of facetious, but it's also sort of true in the sense that we didn't identify with that lifestyle. I think what we were first and foremost was outsiders. It's a great advantage seeing things from the outside because you don't have to take everything, all of the prejudices of the mainstream. You can ignore all of them, and that spreads not just about sexuality, but about food or music or clothes or anything. It's a fantastic advantage to be an outsider, but at the same time, you lose the protection of being in the middle. But if given the choice, I'd always rather be on the outside.
I don't looking back to see the skies turn black. I don't want to be the one. I don't want to be the Sometimes we are the one. Sometimes we are the one.